Today, we're going to discuss the first times Hesed ever appears in the Bible. So, let's talk about it. Hi, I'm David.
And I'm Brian.
And this is Now Let's Be Honest, and this is our second video in our Hesed series, a series where it's more of a passion project, where we're going to be slowly but surely working our way through the Old Testament, looking at all the occurrences of the word Hesed. There are 247 times this word occurs in the Old Testament. We're not going to be doing a single video for every occurrence, but we're going to be doing a lot of videos. And so this is going to be a long-term project that we're going to be taking breaks in, and hopefully we even finish it. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a long thing, and today is the first day we're going to be actually diving into the text of Scripture, beginning with the book of Genesis. Brianne, are you excited?
I am excited.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun one, and we don't fully know exactly how far we're going to get. What we're going to do is I have got my little timer here. We're gonna set a timer and just kind of see, how many we can go through, and then we'll just kind of wrap it up, and it'll be good. It'll be very casual, right? This is not going to be something the whole reason we're doing this series is because I wanted to do something that didn't take a lot of preparation, and so I prepared the PowerPoint slides, and that's about it. And we're just going to be walking through, and I've also got a Bible right here where I have highlighted every occurrence of the word Hesed in the Old Testament. And I'm going to have this right here before me so that if we are forgetting some context or something, we can just kind of look right here very briefly and kind of go through it. And so it'll be good, but I've already talked too long. So Brianne, can you open us up in a word of prayer, and we will just hop right into the book of Genesis?
Yes, absolutely. Lord, we thank you so much for our lives, and we thank you for revealing yourself to us and giving us your word. I ask as we go into the study that we have our hearts open and our minds open, allowing you to guide us and allow our words to be glorifying to you, our thoughts to be glorifying to you, and for our whole goal of this study to be to learn who you are more deeply, who your character is, and why this word Hesed is so important to you and to us and how we relate to you. Lord, we thank you for this day, and please help us through this study and throughout the rest of our day. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Alrighty, so we are going to be beginning with Hesed in the book of Genesis, which I've given us the subtitle, In the Beginning, because this is the first book of the Old Testament, and I believe our first occurrence of Hesed isn't going to be until Genesis chapter 19, and that's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So maybe we should probably cover a little bit of context here, just to kind of get us started with what the book of Genesis is all about, so that we kind of know the context of what we're going to be going into here. So would you like to kick us off, and then maybe just get us to the story of Abraham, and then I'll kind of pick us up off there.
Yeah. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he put man on earth. And he told them not to eat from this one specific tree, but they did, and so they fell away, and they brought sin into the world. But God promised that there was going to be this promised seed that he was going to reveal himself through and redeem the people with. And so the entire time we're seeing man fall further and further away from God as sin is kind of like spiraling in their society. But then there becomes this man named Abraham, and that is who God chooses to reveal himself through in the Israelites.
Yeah. My favorite way to kind of summarize just the whole story of the Bible is by saying that it is God's commitment to dwelling with man once again. Yep. Right? There's this great big God, created everything, but man kind of messed it all up. But God is committed to dwelling with man once again. And so basically the story of Genesis to Revelation is him unfolding that plan. And so when you get to Genesis chapter 12, you got this guy named Abraham who God calls to be the special person for him. And whenever you get to, really over the course of the next few chapters, you kind of have it being explained exactly what God's goals are for him. God makes a covenant with Abraham, all this different stuff. The guy's name is Abram originally. It's changed to Abraham in chapter 17. But then when you get to chapter 18, in specific, there's actually this one verse in particular that really kind of just explains exactly what God is wanting to do with Abraham. He says, I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Then the Lord will give to Abraham what he promised him. I really like in Hebrew the phrase that it's there. It's like Shamar derek Yahweh. It means to keep or protect or guard the way of the Lord, right? So I like calling him like the watcher of the way or the protector of the path of God. This is what Abraham's goal is. He is supposed to be somebody who lives righteously and lives justly in such a way as to point people back to God. And so he has this specific thing where he's setting himself apart for that.
Right.
And so over the course of the chapters, you eventually have God promising Abraham all these different things. And basically the way you're going to view the Abrahamic covenant is that God promises land, seed, and blessing. He says that he is going to give him this certain allotment of land, which we know is the land of Israel, and actually beyond the land of Israel. And then he's going to give him this promised seed, which you talked about.
Yep.
And this is going to be, first off, a direct son through his wife Sarah, but also, ultimately, there's going to be this seed through whom the whole world is blessed, and we believe that's Jesus, you know? But then that also leads to the blessing thing, right? Abraham is going to be blessed by God, he is going to be a blessing to others, and, once again, through that seed, the whole world will be blessed. And so these are kind of the big three components that are driving the whole narrative forward, going not only from Genesis 12, but literally, like, through the rest of the Bible.
Right.
You're kind of waiting for this whole Abrahamic covenant thing to be fulfilled. And that leads us to Genesis chapter 19, where we're going to encounter our first occurrence of the word Hesed. Yep. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about Hesed in Genesis. Hesed appears 11 times in Genesis, and as we can see, it occurs in chapter 19, verse 19, chapter 20, verse 13, chapter 21, verse 23, and then multiple times in chapter 24, and then chapter 32, verse 10, chapter 39, verse 21, chapter 40, verse 14, and chapter 47, verse 29. So you can see it takes a while for us to actually mention Hesed in Genesis.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
We don't get it until chapter 19, but once it shows up, it really starts showing up more and more frequently to where really the back half of this book is filled with Hesed. But I will say that there are themes of Hesed prior to this. I am in Genesis 18 right now in my own personal study, and literally I've mentioned this word almost every single day because whenever you have this whole interaction between Abraham and God as they're discussing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, basically you have this revealing that God is a God of Hesed. He is a God who naturally does not desire to pour out his wrath on people, and he wants to save people if at all possible. Which seems like to be a fundamental component of Hesed.
And we even talked about in the last video, like even when Adam and Eve fell, they ate from the tree, whenever he clothed them, like in the skins. So like that's what, chapter 3?
Yeah, chapter 3.
Yeah, so like even from the 3rd chapter, like you already see themes of Hesed.
Yeah, well that goes back to the quote that we talked about in the last video, where it was like some rabbi or somebody from like the Talmud, and he said that the Torah begins and ends with Hesed, right? Because you have that first act of Hesed whenever God clothes Adam and Eve, even in the midst of their sin, and then the final act of Hesed at the end of Deuteronomy, whenever God buries Moses after his death. And so, yeah, the whole Bible, it's all Hesed, right? This is what Michael Card has to say about Hesed as it appears in Genesis. He says that in Genesis, Hesed indicates an exceptional favor from God, something that has not been earned, but graciously given. What's going to be unique about the occurrences of Hesed in Genesis is that they seem to be more directed at other humans rather than in between God and man. That's something that really kind of sticks out to me because it really doesn't seem like it's until Exodus where you really see Hesed being elevated as a key attribute of who God is. In Genesis, it seems like you see the elements of it there, but it isn't explicitly stated, right? But which makes sense, right? I mean, I can't just come up to you and say I'm a kind person. I have to demonstrate that kindness first, and then later on, once I've demonstrated kindness, I can say it. And so whenever you get to Exodus 34, and God says that he is slow to anger and abounding in Hesed, you'd be like, oh, okay. Oh, that actually was not the right place. He's abounding in Hesed and truth, right? Whenever he says that, you have to expect that throughout Genesis and Exodus, he's already demonstrated that, right? But so in Genesis, we're mainly going to see Hesed occurring as like an interpersonal thing between two people. And so, the first occurrence is in Genesis chapter 19, which is the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. I kind of alluded to this already, but in Genesis chapter 18, we have this whole incident where, God comes, he visits Abraham, and Abraham shows him this remarkable hospitality, which is contrasted by the lack of hospitality showed in Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 19. And then, at the end of this whole hospitality moment thing, Abraham gets up and he walks with God and these two other visitors, and they walk for a little while, and eventually they get to this this precipice overlooking the Dead Sea area, right? And the two guys leave, and they leave kind of Abraham and God standing there together. And God reveals to Abraham that he is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And that is what his intentions are, because their sin has become increasingly evil. Abraham turns to God and says, that doesn't really sound like you. Because God, what if there were righteous people in there? Would you destroy the righteous with the wicked? And you have this whole kind of bargaining situation where Abraham works God down from like 50 people to 45 people to 40 to 30 to 20 to 10. Because Abraham's like, are you going to really destroy the entire city if there are 10 righteous people? And you really see that God is a God of Hesed, right? He's a God who he's like, you know what? If there's 10, I won't destroy them. The issue is that there won't even be 10. And so when we get to Genesis chapter 19, we pick up the story and we see that those other two men who descended into the valley, they've probably gone around the Dead Sea, they've gone into Sodom and Gomorrah, and we're picking up in that story. And this is going to be involving the character of Lot, who is Abraham's nephew, who is very dear to Abraham. We have read a lot about Lot so far in Genesis, and we're going to kind of just see what's going on here. Also, just so y'all know, we're going to be using the New English translation for this series. I have not really worked a lot with the New English translation, the Net Bible, but I kind of wanted to, and so that's kind of what we're doing here. So if you wanted to know why we're doing that, it's just because I kind of arbitrarily picked it, and I do have all the occurrences of Hesed highlighted in blue. So I'm going to read through this, and we're just going to see what we get. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. Then Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were going to marry his daughters. He said, quick, get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was ridiculing them. At dawn, the angels hurried Lot along, saying, get going, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or else you will be destroyed when the city is judged. When Lot hesitated, the men grabbed his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters, because the Lord had compassion on them. They led them away and placed them outside the city. When they had brought them outside, they said, run for your lives. Don't look behind you or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains or you will be destroyed. But Lot said to them, no, please, Lord. Your servant has found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness by sparing my life. But I am not able to escape to the mountains because this disaster will overtake me and I'll die. Look, this town over here is close enough to escape to, and it's just a little one. Let me go there. It's just a little place, isn't it? Then I'll survive. Very well, he replied. I will grant this request too, and will not overthrow the town you mentioned. Run there quickly, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. This incident explains why the town was called Zoar. All right. What do you think about that?
The number one thing that stuck out was in verse 16, how it said, like, the Lord had compassion, which is interesting because that isn't an occurrence of Hesed, but that's a word that, like, is sometimes used in translation for Hesed.
Yep.
So that's kind of interesting because it's talking about, like, a specific action or something that God had displayed to him, but it wasn't Hesed itself, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, this kind of ties back to the whole linguistic gravity thing that I think Michael Card talked about, that we kind of addressed this in the first video. There are certain words that Hesed kind of draws near it, right? Like whenever you encounter the word Hesed in the Bible, typically you can kind of expect to find other terms similar to it around it, kind of just framing the story to help you understand what Hesed really is. And so it makes sense that compassion is found here. And so what we see here is that at the beginning of Genesis chapter 19, like we said, God sent these 2 angels down into the land of Sodom to kind of just go inspect the land. And we know from this story in Genesis 18 that really they're kind of looking out to see if there are, any righteous individuals in there. And it turns out there really aren't. There's going to be Lot, his sons. He's got, 3 sons? Or no, 3 daughters. He's 3 daughters. He's got 3 daughters, and then he's got a wife, and then the daughters, like, fiancés or the people who are pledged to marry them, but they don't seem that great.
2 daughters.
But, is it 2 daughters? I literally just read it. It's 2 daughters. Yeah. Yes, it's 2 daughters right there. I literally just read this. I was
thinking about once they left, and then I was like, how many are there?
Yeah, no, there's 2 daughters. I was kind of thinking about Noah for some reason here. But yes, there are 2 daughters. So there's Lot, his 2 daughters, his wife. That's 4 people so far. And then you've also got the 2, I guess, like, husbands or pledged to be husbands of the daughters. Yeah. But they're not even going to want to go with them.
Right.
And so, like, at most that would be 6 people, but really you're still down to like
4. Yeah, not 10.
That's not 10, right? And so they're not meeting the criteria of what God had asked for. And then also, in the verses leading up to this, you have a very brutal incident, right? I mean, it's the thing that we see paralleled in Judges chapter 19, whenever these two angels, they come into the territory of Sodom, and they're looking for a place to rest. They go into the city square, and basically people are wanting to violate them in a sexual manner. I'm going to try to be as, PG with this as possible, but they're wanting to do some pretty messed up stuff to these people. And so you very quickly realize why God wants to destroy Sodom. Like, this is a very, very, very bad place.
And that tells us something, because it's the first occurrence, like, of a situation that we see from reading the text. You know, like that, shows a lot, because we don't know much about Sodom and Gomorrah other than we know that it has a bad reputation. But now that's like our first occurrence of actually seeing something happen between people that actually live there. So we're like, okay, no, that definitely is a bad place, because the first encounter is not good.
Yeah, because if anything, our impressions of Sodom prior to this might have been decent, because we might have thought them as victims or something, because we have the whole story in Genesis chapter 14, whenever the people of Sodom are they're defeated in battle, and they're taken captive and stuff like that, and Abraham goes and rescues them. Yeah. And then the king of Sodom seems like a decent-ish person in his interactions with Abraham. So you might be led to think these are decent people.
And Lot's not a really bad, he's not a bad dude or anything, he's the one who kind of settled there first, so.
Yeah, and so you might be kind of inclined to think that Sodom's all right. And so whenever you read in Genesis 18, God being like, I want to destroy them, you're like, oh, why? But then you get to Genesis chapter 19, you're like, oh yeah, these people are horrible. Like, especially when you contrast it by the hospitality God that Abraham showed God. Yes. Right? Yeah. Abraham is just amazing, and then the people of Sodom are just the exact opposite of that. Like, they are just terribly inhospitable. And so finally, it leads to this moment where, now we're just going to start kind of walking through these verses. Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were going to marry his daughters. He said, quick, get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. I should have capitalized like where Lord's at here. Some of these occurrences are the word Lord in the terms of like Yahweh, and some are the occurrences of like Adonai, where it's just master. But whenever I copy and pasted it from Bible Gateway, it did not maintain that capitalization thing, which kind of annoys me. But I believe right here, I can look right here because I've got the Bible pulled up in front of me. That is Yahweh. Yeah, right. So, quick, get out of this place, because Yahweh is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was ridiculing them. Right? And so, right at this point, the angels have revealed to Lot, hey, we're going to destroy this place. You need to get out. And Lot seems to take it seriously, and he goes and tells them. But the sons-in-law think he's ridiculing them, which it kind of makes you wonder, like, you start realizing maybe something strange is going on here. Like, how did Lot communicate this? Right? Yeah. Like, did he communicate it in a way where they should have taken it seriously, or did they just think he was crazy? Right here, like other translations also say, like, they thought, like, they laughed at him because they thought he was joking. And so it kind of suggests to me that maybe Lot didn't deliver this in a way that, like, it would make sense if they thought he was crazy. But instead, it just seems like they thought that he was just like messing around, which means that maybe he wasn't like, taking it as seriously as possible, which I think will feed into our first occurrence of Hesed a little bit below.
And it could make you question, like, I guess their interactions outside of this one line, like how he usually communicates to them, if that makes it to where, like, are they ridiculing him like all the time? Is it like a usual thing? Yeah. Or is it just like right here he didn't communicate? But
yeah, that's true. And so at dawn, the angels hurried Lot along, saying, get going! Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or else you will be destroyed when the city is judged. So get out of here. When Lot hesitated, the men grabbed his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters, because the Lord had compassion on them. And so we notice why this is going on. It's not because Lot and them deserve to be taken out. It's because God is having compassion on them. And really, the reason God seems to be having compassion on them goes back to Abraham. Yes. Right? It's not because Lot and them were anything in particular, like particularly special. I know that later on in the Bible, it actually calls Lot a righteous man, which is kind of surprising, because if you go a few verses earlier, Lot literally offered his 2 daughters to the men of Sodom for them to please themselves. And so Lot doesn't necessarily seem like a great guy, but later on in the Bible, it does kind of describe him as a righteous person, which is crazy, but it seems like it's because he had faith in Yahweh, which is cool.
Yeah.
But right here, Lot does not seem to be taking this as seriously, right? I mean, he goes to his sons-in-law, and he doesn't really convey this in a manner that they take seriously. And then even whenever these angels are coming to him, he's hesitating, right? So the men literally have to grab Lot and the hands of the wife and the daughters because the Lord had compassion on them, right? So they're like, okay, y'all aren't doing your job. So they literally have to like grab onto them and drag them out of the city.
Yeah.
Not because they deserve it, but because God is being gracious to them and is having compassion on them, right? When they had brought them outside, they said, "Run for your lives. Don't look behind you or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains or you will be destroyed." Right? So you can see how the angels are emphasizing this like very seriously.
Right.
You need to get out. This is a very serious matter. And I'm kind of emphasizing all this because this is leading up to our first encounter of Hesed, right? But Lot said to them, right? And we already know that Lot is not taking this as seriously as he should. And so his response is going to be quite telling. But Lot said to them, "No, please, Lord." And Lord here is just like Adonai, right? Like it's just like, hey, like master. Like, so there's reverence here, but he's like, "No, please. Your servant has found favor with you." Notice that the word favor shows up there as well, right? This is like chen. And so it's, once again, that's one of those linguistic gravity words that we talked about before.
Yeah.
Your servant has found favor with you, and you have shown me great chesed by sparing my life. But I am not able to escape to the mountains because this disaster will overtake me and I'll die. So what do you think Lot is communicating here whenever he says, "You've shown me great chesed"?
It's really interesting that that's the like first occurrence and that's where it's out, just because he isn't that serious about it, but that term is a more like serious term to where he has to somewhat recognize the weight of it, but it's like he doesn't want to take it seriously or something.
Yeah.
But
well, it seems like he's starting to get the point.
Yeah.
Because like at this point, literally these guys have dragged him and his wives out of the city. And I think he's beginning to realize it. But we also see some of his responses kind of twisted here.
Yeah.
Which I think might be less about Hesed and more just about the fact that Lot is a guy who has been in Sodom for a long time. Right? He's been in there for decades, and so he just kind of warped perspective so that some of the stuff he's saying is correct, some of it is not correct. But in regards to Hesed here, and really our goal in this whole series is trying to figure out what Hesed is. Notice what it's tied to. It's tied to compassion because what is the Lord showing them? Compassion, right? That is why they're grabbing them, dragging them out of the city, because God is showing them compassion. And then what does Lot say? Your servant has found favor, right? That is the word chen in Hebrew. It could also be translated as grace. We have found favor with you, and you have shown me great Hesed, right? So how have we found favor? Because you've shown us Hesed. Well, how'd they show them Hesed? By showing them compassion, right? And so you see how all these are building up to give us an idea of what Hesed is. It's a mixture of grace and compassion, right? And that's kind of what you're getting this idea here of really what the term is. And Lot is responding, and he understands that he does not deserve this, because that's what all these things are, right? Whenever you're showing compassion to somebody, that's not something that we should automatically expect somebody to do, right? Compassion, I mean, you don't want to always look back to the etymology of words to try to determine like what they mean, but literally the etymology of compassion is to suffer with. Like passion is to suffer, calm is with, right? So compassion is when you're suffering with somebody, right? And obviously the definition changes over time to where now it's not literally suffering with them, but you're having an emotional response to the suffering they're undertaking, right? Like that they're going through. God feels for Lot and them, and therefore he's dragging them out. He's suffering alongside them, and therefore that suffering causes him to take action. Favor, grace, what is that? It's the Ben Stewart definition. Whenever an unobligated giver gives to an undeserving people an unbelievable gift. Lot is saying, we don't deserve for you to be doing this to us. You are unobligated to do so, yet you've still helped us out. We have found favor with you because you have done this great act for us, and you have shown us this chesed by sparing our life. And so you really do have Hesed being compared to compassion and grace, and those two things are culminating together to describe what they have done in sparing their life. And that goes back to the Michael Card definition of Hesed, right? It's whenever... What is his definition of Hesed? It's... Like the wow, I'm blanking on the term. It's I should have this pulled up. You're receiving everything from somebody from whom you have the right to expect nothing. Yes. Right? I mean, it's along those lines. That's not like the correct like word for word definition there. But really, the emphasis of his definition is you have no right to expect anything from somebody. That is what Lot's getting across here. He has no right to expect anything from these angels, yet they have done everything for them. Right? I mean, sure. I'm kind of trying to think how to relate this. I probably should have quoted more of this passage here. Because what's interesting is that Lot did actually do something for the angels, right?
Right.
Because Lot actually did show them hospitality when nobody else would.
Yeah.
And so that might seem like a place where you could merit some sort of reciprocity. But from his perspective, it seems like that's not the case. He says that he has found favor in their sight because he realizes that their visiting him was already a gift in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right? And so I just think that's kind of cool. And so he recognizes that they are showing him great kindness by sparing his life. But I am not able to escape to the mountains because this disaster will overtake me and I'll die. This is where I think Lot begins to kind of fall back into his incorrect form of thinking. Right? Because they literally just said, escape to the mountains or you will be destroyed. And he says, I can't escape to the mountains or I'll die. And it's like, well, this doesn't really make much sense.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're saying, okay, the disaster is going to be so severe that unless you're in the mountains, you'll die.
Right.
And he says, well, no. I'm going to die if I have to go to the mountains. And I guess the implication for him is that he doesn't think he has enough time to reach the mountains.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there doesn't seem to be a lot of logic going on here because, like, it's the idea that the scope of the destruction is going to be too big. And really, once again, Lot just doesn't seem to be taking this as seriously as he should because he continues to say, look, this town over here is close enough to escape to. And it's just a little one. And it's like, okay, it's close enough to escape to. The whole point is that this destruction is going to be vast.
Yeah.
You don't want to go to a town that's close to escape to, right? Like, you want to get as far away as possible. That's why they said go to the mountains.
Yeah.
But he just seems to not be getting this.
Yeah.
Let me go there. It's just a little place, isn't it? Then I'll survive. So once again, who do you think knows more about the destruction? Lot or the men? Well, most likely the men, right? The angels. Like, they seem to know more about the destruction than Lot does, but he seems to be underplaying it. That all being said, I think that serves to advance and help highlight what exactly Hesed is. Because it highlights that Lot does not deserve this.
Right.
Because these people are constantly trying to give every single effort to help deliver Lot from the land. And he is just resisting left and right. He's not taking it seriously enough. He's going to his sons-in-law and apparently not presenting it in a serious enough manner. He's kind of hesitating when it comes to leaving the town. And even whenever they give him explicit instructions on how to survive, he's like, I don't want to put in that much effort. Can I just go to that town over there and maybe like y'all just like make the destruction less?
Yeah.
It's like, Lot, are you not getting the point?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because he says the word Hesed in literally the same breath that he, like, does something opposite. You know what I mean? So, like, it's even in the same verse. So it's like he says that word and he understands a little bit more the weight of the situation and, like, the favor that those two angels are showing him. But then in the very next sentence, he's like, oh, but no, I can't go that far. Yeah. So it's, like, not even a verse apart. It's in the same verse that he is able to, like, recognize it but then completely forget it at the same time.
He understands that he doesn't deserve what they're giving him, yet at the same time he asks for more.
Yeah.
Which is an abuse of Hesed, I would say. But it also seems to emphasize what God's Hesed is. Because when you go to verse 21, you'll see that they're going to show him more Hesed. Very well, he replied. I will grant this request too, and will not overthrow the town you mentioned. Run there quickly, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. This incident explains why the town was called Zoar, right? And so the word Zoar, I believe it means like small or something like that, or just like little. I could be wrong there. I don't have a Bible with footnotes. Oh, it actually does say that. Zoar apparently means little place. Yeah. So I was correct. Haha. But yeah, so this just explains why it's called Zoar, because it's a little bitty place that Lot's like, oh, I can go there, and you just don't have to destroy them. Yeah. But notice how this is once again increasing Hesed, right? They're showing favor upon favor upon favor. And so that is our first occurrence of Hesed in the entire Bible. Kind of cool. Yeah. But it's a very different way of viewing Hesed than how we're going to see it later on. Because right now we're having to kind of work through it and figure out what exactly does this term mean. And interestingly about Hesed is that there's no similar term in other languages. Like other languages don't have like words that are similar to that to where we kind of figure out what it is.
Yeah.
It really is a word that's unique to the Hebrew language, and so we're really having to just work through this, be like, what exactly is this?
Yeah.
And so Genesis is kind of laying out what Hesed is, so that whenever we get to Exodus, we'll get, why God is saying that is who he is.
Right.
Okay, so that's Genesis chapter 19. Let's move on into the next chapter. Plot, just spoiler alert here, for a book that came out thousands of years ago, Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed.
Yes.
Lot and his daughters do escape. His wife is turned into a pillar of salt.
Yep.
And his daughters decide to just do this crazy thing at the end of chapter 19, which I'm not going to get into because, once again, trying to keep this PG, but it is absolutely crazy. But now we move into chapter 20, and we go back to the story of Abraham because really the whole Lot and Sodom thing was just kind of depicting just another aspect of who God is and what's going on there. We go back to Abraham. And now we have Abraham journeying into the Negev region, which is in the south. And he settles in this place where he encounters this guy named Abimelech. And what Abraham does here is something that he had done before, back in chapter 12, where basically Abraham fears for his life. And so he tells his wife Sarah to basically lie and say that she is his sister, which isn't entirely incorrect because they are kind of like half-siblings. But it is wrong, right? And we saw God get on to him in chapter 12, but Abraham does the same thing in chapter 20, despite all the stuff that's gone on. And so that leads us to verse 8, where we read this. Early in the morning, Abimelech summoned all his servants. When he told them about all these things, they were terrified. What had happened is that God appeared to Abimelech and told him, hey, don't mess with Sarah. Like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Abimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? What sin did I commit against you that would cause you to bring such great guilt on me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done. Then Abimelech asked Abraham, what prompted you to do this thing? Abraham replied, because I thought surely no one fears God in this place. They will kill me because of my wife. What's more, she is indeed my sister, my father's daughter, but not my mother's daughter. She became my wife. When God made me wander from my father's house, I told her, this is what you can do to show your loyalty to me. Every place we go, say about me, he is my brother. So Abimelech gave sheep, cattle, and male and female servants to Abraham. He also gave his wife Sarah back to him. Then Abimelech said, look, my land is before you. Live wherever you please. To Sarah he said, look, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. This is compensation for you, so that you will stand vindicated before all who are with you. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, as well as his wife and female slaves, so that they were able to have children. For the Lord had caused infertility to strike every woman in the house of Abimelech, because he took Sarah, Abraham's wife. All right. What do you think of that story?
It's interesting that Abraham was asking his wife to show like Hesed and loyalty to him, but in the end it was God who was showing it, like
yes,
through like healing Abimelech, because I mean what happened was not right, but it was interesting that he asked his wife to do it, but then it was God that ended up being the one who was actually showing that Hesed.
Yeah, that's actually, it's really, I think that it's not an accident that the word Hesed is employed here and then followed by verses 14 through 18. Because here Abraham is asking his wife, hey, I want you to show me Hesed in this way.
Yeah.
And he is defining Hesed in a way that is actually very inappropriate, right?
Yeah. Right.
And
yeah.
we're going to see this throughout the Bible. Hesed is not always a good thing. Hesed actually can be a bad thing. There's actually, I think, 2 or 3 occurrences out of all the 247 where Hesed is a bad thing to do. Because it's all about whenever you're giving somebody something that they have no right to expect from you. And so, technically, if somebody is a good person and you do something bad to them, that is also Hesed. And the Bible warns you against that. And so here we have Abraham. He's turning to his wife and saying, this is how you can show your Hesed to me. And his way of defining it is not the appropriate way. But then you have verses 14 through 18 where God actually demonstrates Hesed and Abimelech demonstrates Hesed in appropriate ways, right? And so I think that is very interesting. I'm glad you pointed that out. So let's walk through this. So early in the morning, after God had appeared to Abimelech and told him all these things, Abimelech summoned all his servants. When he told them about all these things, they were terrified. And whenever you're just reading through the narrative, this should be surprising to you, because the whole reason Abraham did this, and Abraham's going to explain this, is because he thought that these people didn't fear God. And which, ironically, Abraham should have feared God more. Because if Abraham had feared God, he would not have gone about this whole deceit thing. He would have just been honest. He would have trusted God to take care of him. But because he thought that other people didn't fear God, he also chose to not fear God, which is just ironic. Wait, it doesn't work that way. It's a self-righteous thing. We're all guilty of this, right? Yeah. But Abraham was like, oh, well, these nasty, terrible pagan people, they're obviously horrible, so I have to lie to them about my wife. So what's ironic here is that Abimelech hears this thing from God. He tells his servants, and they're all terrified at the fact that they have sinned against a man of God. And so this should be really surprising to us too, because you wouldn't expect pagans to respond this way. You would expect them to be like, oh man, that's funny. But they're terrified. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did this. Abimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? What sin did I commit against you that would cause you to bring such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? Once again, this is all leading up to the word Hesed, right? And so Abraham is doing the bad form of Hesed. Like he's like, what did I do to you? Like Abimelech is saying, he's like, I'm innocent. Yes, I'm innocent of this. I've done nothing but good things to you. Why did you do this bad thing to me? This is negative Hesed. This is, you are being, it's not being gracious, it's being disgracious, right? You're being a disgrace, right? That's literally what to be a disgrace is. You're doing the opposite of graciousness. You're taking grace, perverting it, and doing bad things to good people. Abimelech's like, what the heck, man? Like, why would you do this to me? I haven't done anything wrong to you. You have done things to me that should not be done. You see how this is building up to the word Hesed? Because what Abraham's going to say is, oh, I was asking my wife to show me Hesed. He's kind of deflecting the blame a little bit. Then Abimelech asked Abraham, what prompted you to do this thing? Do you see how many questions are repeated here? You have one, two, three. You have three questions and an exclamation in the middle of that. You have done things that should not be done. So there's three questions, which are just kind of narratively speaking, from a literary perspective. They're building up to this climactic moment where Abraham reveals why he did this. Right? And so we're building up to a climax here. I'm a really big fan of literature and stuff like that, and so I really love the dramatic tension here. So he's asked three questions. Why? You shouldn't have done this. Why? Abraham replied, because I thought surely no one fears God in this place. And already, once again, you should be shocked by this. Like, Abraham, so you thought we didn't fear God, and so you thought you'd take things into your own hands? That sounds a lot like somebody who doesn't fear God. You know? It's like, well, we're the only ones who were terrified whenever God showed up to us, so it seems like we're the ones who fear God, and you're not fearing God. They will kill me because of my wife. You see how Abraham's kind of deflecting here? Oh, it's because of my wife. She's attractive, and I didn't want to get hurt. And, I was like, well, Abraham, where's your trust of God? Like, you're judging these people because they don't fear God. And you think you're all high and mighty because you fear God, but your fear of God's not changing how you act. Right? Where's your fear of God, you holy man of God? What's more, she is indeed my sister, my father's daughter, but not my mother's daughter. She became my wife. Well, plus, it wasn't a total lie. It was just it was a half-truth.
Like a white lie.
Yeah, it was a white lie. She is my sister. She's my half-sister. It's like, okay, first off, that's kind of weird. But back in that culture, maybe it was a little more normal. The main thing is, okay.
The heart behind it.
Well, yes.
It's like you went in wanting to deceive them. Like, that was your goal whenever you said that. It wasn't like oh, well, I guess she's halfway my sister, so I guess I could say that. Like, no, you went in there for the reason that you wanted to deceive them so that they wouldn't kill you.
Yeah, well, it's like if a parent comes up to a kid and is like, hey, did you steal a cookie from the cookie jar? No, I didn't steal a cookie from the cookie jar.
A crumb.
No, I didn't steal a cookie from the cookie jar. I had Brienne steal the cookie for me from the cookie jar. It's like, okay, then you stole the cookie from the cookie jar. You know what I mean? Like, he's just deflecting here because, okay, sure, he does have this sibling relationship with Sarah, but he also has a marriage relationship with Sarah. Which of those two is more worthwhile to important? Wait. Well, that was worded weird. which one of those two is more worthwhile to mention whenever men have come to you asking to bring that woman into their household?
Your marriage.
Marriage, right? Yeah, you would probably be like, oh, she's my wife. Yeah. And so, once again, you see that he's trying to justify this, but it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
She became my wife, right? So she became my wife. Sorry, I forgot to mention that part. Y'all just took her so quickly, I just didn't get a chance to. It doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. When God made me wander from my father's house. He's almost blaming God here. It's kind of calling back to Adam and Eve a little bit, right? Whenever it's like, oh, this woman that you placed with me, right? Okay, that's Genesis chapter 3. Okay. When God made me wander from my father's house, I told her, this is what you can do to show your Hesed to me. Every place we go, say about me, he is my brother. And so we see that this is a regular thing. This is why it's repeated as well, I think. Because we saw a very similar story in chapter 12, but we didn't know that this was a thing that Abraham regularly asked Sarah to do. Yeah. And after the chapter 12 incident, we kind of assumed that he'd stopped. But the ironic thing is that he probably isn't even going to stop here.
Right.
Because in the next chapter, Isaac is born, and later on in Isaac's life, he's going to do the same thing, which means that he had to learn that from his dad. And so we see that Abraham isn't going to stop this. But I want to ask you, what do you think of Abraham's use of the word Hesed here?
I feel like it kind of puts Sarah like in a corner. Because he's asking her to do something that's like outright wrong, and she probably knows like, oh, hey, that's kind of weird. And I doubt that she would be like, oh yes, I want to like say that you're my brother, and for like another man to like take me into his house. I feel like she would be uncomfortable with that. But whenever you say you have to do that in order to show like loyalty or Hesed towards him, I feel like that like puts her kind of in a corner.
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's a very selfish thing to ask. I mean, because if you think about it, what he's asking here is like, hey, whenever we get to a place and somebody comes asking for you to marry them, I don't want to die because you're such a beautiful woman. Like, it sounds like a compliment, right? You're such a beautiful woman that they're going to just really want you. And I personally don't want to die. And so just tell them you're my sibling and go live in their household.
Yeah. So it's just like using her.
Well, you're just objectifying her. And so the way that you can show me loyalty, and you can see why they translate it loyalty here, right? It's showing devotion, right? But I still would prefer them to just translate it as Hesed because you lose the connection. In the last chapter, they translated it as kindness. Right? You have shown me great kindness by sparing my life. Right? You could use it. You could translate it the same way here. This is how you can show your kindness towards me. I would prefer us to just translate it as Hesed, just so that you could, just see that semantic connection there. This is how you show your Hesed to me. Everywhere we go, objectify yourself so that I don't have to die. Yikes. That is very evidently not actual Hesed, right? Like, that is not the good form of it. This is terrible, but it fits Michael Card's definition. Right? Give me everything when I have the right to expect nothing. It's like, honey, I know that we're married and I have no right to expect you to do this thing, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyways. Yeah. And we'll see that Sarah does it. Yeah. Right? She did it in chapter 12. She did it right here. And apparently she's going to do it going forward. And so it's very interesting because you're like, okay, that seems like a very inappropriate way to do this.
And it paints it under, I feel like he's trying to paint it under a better light than what it actually is by using that word too.
Yeah, and it's it goes with the whole Lot thing. It's abusing Hesed. This actually goes to a question I saw it in the comments of our first Hesed video, and I did not reply to it yet because that video, like at the day we're recording this, that video premiered yesterday. I haven't replied to it, but I saw that somebody commented and they said, how do we show Hesed while avoiding becoming doormats to people? Yes. That is a genuinely hard question to answer. Because we see in our first two occurrences of the word Hesed in the Bible, we see it being abused. Yes. Right? Lot says, you've shown me Hesed, show me more. Right here, Abraham's saying, show me Hesed by objectifying yourself. And so we see that Hesed can be abused. We see that, that's the whole thing. Whenever you're gracious to somebody, this is a thing that Christians have to wrestle with because Jesus is all about turn the other cheek, walk the extra mile, constantly give to people who are taking from you. Yeah. And now we live in this culture, and this is not just in our culture, it's overall cultures, overall time period. We don't want that. We're like, I don't want to be stepped upon. I don't want to be a doormat to people. Yeah. But that is a genuine possibility. And I'm not saying that you should be that. You've got to wrestle through how to do that. But in our first two occurrences of the word, we see it can be abused.
Yeah.
And we see not only can it be abused, it is being abused.
Yeah.
Lot abused it, Abraham abused it, and whenever you go through the rest of the Bible, you're going to see that it is abused. You get to the New Testament, and what does Paul say about grace in Romans? Shall we go on sinning that grace may abound? Because he tells people how God is glorified, in his ability to show us grace. And so some people would be like, oh, well, if God receives greater glory by showing us greater grace, maybe we should sin more so that he can show us more grace and be more glorified. And Paul's like, no, that's twisted. But that is a genuine possibility, right? People naturally want to abuse grace. They want to abuse Hesed. They want to abuse compassion. That's just what people do.
Yeah.
You show them kindness, they'll appreciate it. You show them kindness again, they'll get used to it. You keep showing them kindness, eventually they'll abuse it and take it for granted.
Yeah.
That's just one of those things, and that's that's why Hesed is such a remarkable attribute of God. Because God constantly puts himself in a position where we abuse the way he relates to us.
Yeah.
Right? That is why Christians a lot of the times don't appreciate God as much. Because he is this God who is constantly giving himself whenever we have no right to expect it. And that is kind of like the whole mystery of this whole thing. And that's why I think it really is so remarkable that he is a God of Hesed. Because you're like, you don't have to be. For some reason, you're allowing yourself to be put in this position where we abuse what you've given us. Yeah. And so we do see Abraham abusing this Hesed here. And he says, hey, honey, you want to prove your devotion, your faithfulness, your covenantal love, your loving kindness to me? Everywhere we go, tell people you're my brother. So everywhere we go, lie about our relationship. Make yourself seem more distant to me so that you might be objectified, taken in to another person's household, and treated however they want you to be treated. And really, the only reason that he is still with Sarah is because God saved him in both situations. Because really, there is no outlet here, right? Like, it's not like Abraham 10 years later is going to be like, by the way, that was my wife. Can I have her back? No, like, Abraham's whole thing here is like, I would rather give you up than lose my life.
Yeah, which is weird because he has this promised seed thing.
Exactly.
And so it's like, you can't lose your wife because there's this promised seed that has to come through you. So then you're also putting kind of God in a corner too, where it's like, you're just going to go away and give your wife away, but he has this promise that has to be fulfilled through you and your wife. And he's just like, oh yeah, Sarah, you can just, go over there with him. Like, that's wrong on so many levels. Like, not only to Sarah, but to God also. So.
Yeah, and back in chapter 12, it seems like he didn't necessarily view it as directly tied to Sarah.
Right.
Because later on, he ends up having a child with Hagar, and all that stuff goes on.
Yeah.
But by the time you reach chapter 20, not only has it been associated with Sarah, but according to God, it is less than a year away from fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right? Chapter 17, God shows up and is like, hey, next year I'm coming back. And you're going to have this baby. In chapter 17, 18, 19, 20, this all happens in this contained year. And so Abraham's like less than a year away from having this kid, yet he's still willing to give up his wife. And like, he's willing to forfeit his wife. He's willing to forfeit the covenant of God, all for the sake of his own life.
Yeah.
That is not a good look.
Yeah.
But then, after all of that, you see a very bad demonstration of Hesed. You get to verse 14. So Abimelech gave sheep, cattle, and male and female servants to Abraham. Like, this, once again, should surprise you. This is more surprising than back up in verse 8, whenever they were terrified.
Right.
Because you would expect Abimelech to say, dude, get out of here. I hate you. You suck. What the heck, man? Like, we were nothing but good to you, and you were terrible to us.
Yeah.
But instead, they respond by giving him gifts.
Yeah.
Like, you see how this is a direct contrast to the Hesed that Abraham was asking Sarah to demonstrate.
Right.
Like, Abraham was abusing Hesed by asking for more. But then now Abimelech gives him something that he has no right to expect. Abraham should expect punishment and hatred from Abimelech, yet Abraham gives him something lovely. Abimelech gave him sheep, cattle, male and female servants to Abraham. He also gave his wife Sarah back to him. What?
Yeah.
This is crazy. Like, Abraham does not deserve to have Sarah back.
Right.
Like, he knows how valuable Sarah is as a person, elevated by the fact that she's going to be the mother of the chosen seed, elevated by the fact that she is directly tied to the covenant of God, yet he willingly gave her up. At this point, Abimelech should keep her. God should say, you know what, Abraham, I'm moving on. But instead, he gets Sarah back.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he has done nothing wrong, he hasn't even apologized. Right? That is Hesed, both on the part of Abimelech and on the part of God. Then Abimelech said, "Look, my land is before you. Live wherever you please." Do you see how it increases one upon another? We see that like the bad form of Hesed, and then you have the true form of Hesed, but it's not explicitly stated. It just builds upon it. To Sarah, he said, "Look, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother." I like how the Net Bible puts it in like quotations there. Yeah. To your brother. This is compensation for you, that you will stand vindicated before all who are with you. Right? And so it's like here, like Abimelech's just giving. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, as well as his wife and female slaves, so that they were able to have children. And this is the kicker. For the Lord had caused infertility to strike every woman in the household of Abimelech, because he took Sarah, Abraham's wife. Like, I like that was not revealed until the end.
Yeah.
Because you're like, wait, what? So you see that in the background of all of this, God is showing Hesed to Abraham. Because, I mean, this is what led to all of this happening. God took the initiative. He made all the women infertile because he was trying to lead to this conflict that brought Sarah back into Abraham's arms. Abraham had willingly given up the covenant, basically. And then God does all these things to bring her back to Abraham. Yeah. Including punishing the people who were innocent in all of this. Right. You can see why some people might translate this as covenantal love. Right? Because it seems like he is showing greater love to Abraham than to Abimelech. Abraham is guilty. Abimelech is innocent. Yet the innocent are being punished for the sake of the guilty. Interesting. It's almost like a direct contrast to the Sodom and Gomorrah thing, where Abraham had literally asked God, "Don't do that to Sodom and Gomorrah." Yeah. Right? And so, very interesting what's going on there. Do you have any more comments that you want to say about this story before we move on to our final one that we'll cover today?
I don't think so.
Okay. So, we go into chapter 21, and this is called Abraham and Abimelech Part 2, but you'll notice that a bunch of stuff has happened in between here. Specifically, in between the last story and this story, Isaac has been born. Right? This has been something that's been building up to since chapter 12. We've been waiting for Isaac to be born, and finally, at long last, Isaac was born. And this finally leads us to verse 20, where it says, "God was with the boy as he grew. He lived in the wilderness and became an archer. He lived in the wilderness of Paran." This is talking not about Isaac, but about Ishmael. Okay. Right? Because shortly after Isaac's birth, Ishmael and Hagar leave again, and they stay gone. And so Ishmael is growing. He lived in the wilderness of Paran. His mother found a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And so we have both Isaac growing and Ishmael growing alongside one another, but not literally alongside one another. They're distant. Yes. And then we see this transition into verse 22, which takes us back to Abraham and Abimelech, now that some time has passed. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God is with you in all that you do. Now swear to me right here in God's name that you will not deceive me, my children, or my descendants. Show me in the land where you are staying the same loyalty that I have shown to you." Abraham said, "I swear to do this." But Abraham lodged a complaint against Abimelech concerning a well that Abimelech's servants had seized. "I do not know who has done this thing," Abimelech replied. "Moreover, you did not tell me. I did not hear about it until today." Abraham took some sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech. The two of them made a treaty. Then Abraham set 7 ewe lambs apart from the flock by themselves. Abimelech asked Abraham, "What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart?" He replied, "You must take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand as legal proof that I dug this well. That is why I named this place Beersheba, because the two of them swore an oath there." This is why he named the place Beersheba. So they made a treaty at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba. There he worshipped the Lord, the eternal God. So Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for quite some time. What do you think about it?
I like that Hesed was translated as loyalty in this one and the last one.
Yes.
Because they, directly correlate to each other.
Oh, okay. Sorry, there was a long gap there. She looked like she was about to say something else, and I was waiting there. Sorry about that. Okay, so one thing that I like here is that Abimelech says, show me the same Hesed I have shown you. But thus far, we haven't seen a moment where the Bible has explicitly told us Abimelech showed Abraham Hesed. Right? In the last section, we just saw that was what was happening. And so that just kind of confirms to us that we were correct in saying, see, Abimelech is showing Abraham Hesed here because he's giving him what he has no right to expect. And so here, we just get the confirmation of that. So, at that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Yeah, no duh. Yeah. This is probably a fair conclusion whenever literally this guy has wronged you and you're the one who had to pay for it, right? Yeah. Your women were infertile for a time because, like...
This dude deceived
you. Yeah. It's like, yeah, God is with you. Now swear to me right here in God's name that you will not deceive me, my children, or my descendants, right? So just promise me you won't do to me what you've done to me in the past. Like, let's just make things right. Let's kind of strike a treaty. Let's be buds. Show me in the land where you are staying. Notice that it's also directed at land. Right? Right? It's not just a human thing. You can also show Hesed to land, right? To inanimate objects. Right? You can actually be gracious to land. Interesting. The same Hesed that I have shown you, right? And we have seen Abimelech's Hesed. It just hasn't been explicitly stated until this moment. We saw all that he gave to Abraham. He gave him slaves. He gave him animals. He gave him money. He did all this stuff for Abraham. Abraham said, I swear to do this. Abraham says, I will show you the same Hesed back. But Abraham lodged a complaint against Abimelech concerning a well that Abimelech's servants had seized. I do not know who has done this thing, Abimelech replied. Moreover, you did not tell me. I did not hear about it until today. So we have this kind of contrast thing where Abimelech showed Abraham a bunch of graciousness despite the fact that Abraham had clearly and intentionally wronged him.
Right.
But then Abraham immediately, he promises Hesed to Abimelech, but immediately follows that up by lodging a complaint against Abimelech for something Abimelech had no idea was even going on.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have this contrast. Abimelech is very gracious to Abraham, even though Abraham intentionally deceived him. And now Abraham, despite vowing Hesed to Abimelech, complains against him for something Abimelech didn't even know what was happening.
Yeah.
But we move on. Abraham took some sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech. And so it seems like whenever Abimelech explained himself, Abraham was like, okay, that's fair. And he shows him the Hesed, right? Yeah. He's like, okay, you know what? Here, take this stuff. The two of them made a treaty. Then Abraham set 7 ewe lambs apart from the flock by themselves. Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you've set apart? He replied, you must take the 7 ewe lambs from my hand as legal proof that I dug this well. Do you see what's happening here a little bit? It seems like Abraham is trying to strike a deal, but it's not really as much on the whole grace. It's not like a just agreement. It's like it's more of like a formal agreement. Like, hey, let's make something official here. I'm paying this to you so that you agree this is mine.
Yeah.
Whereas really, it kind of seems to go against a little bit of what Abimelech was wanting here. It seems like Abimelech...
I feel like it's missing like the element of the trust. It's like there has to be a physical proof of like, you have these 7 lambs, so therefore we know I dug this well. Instead of it being like, oh, we just like know that the dug was well because I'm going to trust you. That type of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not going to say inherently whether that is bad or whether that's a good or bad thing that Abraham did this here. Really, that goes back to whether or not he should show Hesed to Abimelech in this case. Because it means what exactly does Abimelech mean whenever he's asking him to show Hesed? Is that something that Abraham should do? Is he wanting a covenant? Should Abraham do that? I don't really know. We're not going to really wrestle through that right now. But it does seem like at the very least, Abraham is not responding to Abimelech exactly how Abimelech had intended. Nevertheless, I think the relationship's still gonna be all right.
Right.
But, that is why that is why he named that place Beersheba, because the two of them swore an oath there, right? And we're gonna see, I think, another reason why the place is called Beersheba later on in the Bible. But so they made a treaty at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he worshipped the Lord, the eternal God, right? Because once again, the Lord had been with him, and so he worships God. And we see this phrase a lot throughout Genesis, where Abraham is constantly returning to God. He worships God. He builds an altar. And it seems like that's kind of Abraham always returning back to, where he once was. It's kind of the whole returning to your first love thing.
Yeah.
So Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for quite some time. And that's going to be the end of chapter 21, which leads us into chapter 22, which is going to be a stark contrast to what we've seen in these Abraham and Abimelech things. Because in chapter 22, we're actually going to see Abraham at the best of the best, right? Genesis chapter 22 is whenever, God calls to Abraham and is like, hey, go sacrifice your son.
Right.
And Abraham's like, okay.
Okay, yeah.
Right? And so we're actually going to see a really good Abraham there. But that is all formed by the Hesed that God has shown him in these previous chapters. Yeah. And so there are our first 3 occurrences of Hesed in the book of Genesis. Do you have anything you want to comment about those occurrences really before we kind of wrap up this first video?
I think it's interesting that some of the first occurrences are kind of more the negative side of it. Just because I feel like it adds to the buildup of it.
Yes.
Which is really cool, especially because you're leading up to God saying, like, Hesed is a central characteristic of who he is. It's very interesting that it starts off negative because you see, okay, well, it's not that. It's almost like you can mark stuff off the list. Like, okay, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. And then, like, God reveals himself as that being a key attribute of him. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's it type of thing. So that's kind of cool.
I think it makes a lot of sense, too, that we're seeing it on an interpersonal level in Genesis, because that's something that we understand more, right? I mean, really, the whole question, we have to realize that Genesis is not only the first book of, like, the Christian scriptures, it's the first book of Jewish scriptures as well. This is the book that's supposed to introduce us to who God is. And so if we're trying to figure out what sets our God apart, we have to figure out how to relate to him. And we understand how we relate to humans.
Yeah.
And so what we see is we see Hesed being demonstrated throughout Genesis in regards to how humans relate to one another.
Yes.
And interestingly, we see how easily Hesed is abused. And we see how difficult it is to show Hesed to people, right? Because naturally, we don't want to do this, right? Like, Sarah would not naturally want to do that for Abraham.
Right.
Nor should Abraham expect Sarah to do that, right? All these things are things that we have no right to expect from somebody, and they're being very nice to us when they decide to do it, right? So it really kind of goes against natural human nature to show Hesed to one another. It's just against who we naturally are as selfish individuals, because really it involves a level of selflessness.
Right.
And so you're seeing this on an interpersonal level where you're like, okay, so I see that Hesed is a very difficult thing for humans to relay to one another. But then whenever you get to Exodus, God's going to say, I am a God of Hesed. And you're like, whoa, wait.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is, once again, Genesis is teaching us how do we relate to this great big God? Like, what sets this God apart from all the other gods? You get to Exodus, and he says, I'm a God of Hesed. Well, now you're like, well, let me go back through.
Yeah.
And you look at Genesis, you're like, oh, he is a God of Hesed.
Yeah.
Like, literally, the thing that it's so difficult for humans to do this to one another, and we're so quick to abuse it. And then you look at how we relate to God, you're like, yep, he's the exact same thing. And so I think it actually is really good that our first occurrences of Hesed are they're really negative. Because you're like, wow, this is very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to abuse. And then you're like, and God would choose to do that to us? That really does make it different. Like, that is a very different type of God than any other God in any other religion, right? That's what sets the Judeo-Christian God apart from all other gods.
Yeah.
And so I think that is very interesting, right? It's like you would expect it to be like all positive things, but instead, no. Like, what we've seen in these first 3 occurrences is that Hesed can be abused, Hesed is difficult to do, and it goes against our natural human inclinations.
Right.
And then somehow God is going to say that is who he is. So, interesting. But yeah, so there is our first video just kind of walking through this. We got through 3 occurrences of 247 occurrences. We'll get through more next time because literally in chapter 24 of Genesis, we have 4 occurrences of the word. So even if we only go through one story, we'll cover at least 4. But yeah, so thank you so much for joining us in this video. I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're joining me here for that. And do you have anything else you want to say before we kind of just say toodles?
I don't think so.
All right, cool. Well, my name's David.
And my name's Brian.
This is Now Let's Be Honest. Be sure to keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. If you haven't already, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, maybe comment below and let us know anything that we might have missed or any like little Hesed moments that you kind of noticed as we were going through this. Thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, this kind of just a passion project that we're kind of doing. And glad to have you along for the ride. We will see you later. Bye.
Bye.
You read a verse, you sing a hymn, the money's in the plate. Sundays you mark out for him, but even then you show up late. You bought the shirt, you wear the cross, but sin throughout the week. For 30 shekels and a noose, you kiss him on the cheek.